Good evening and welcome to the City of Topeka Planning Commission meeting. We're a commission appointed by the mayor and the city council to plan for the orderly growth and development of the community and to hold public hearings and to make recommendations to the city council on planning items. Please note that the city council rules state that public hearings for planning cases shall be conducted solely by the planning commission. No additional public hearings will be conducted by the city council. Tonight's cases are tentatively scheduled to be heard by the city council next month. Agendas are found at topeka.org. For cases that require public hearings, the procedures will be as follows. First, the planning department staff will summarize the case. Next, we will hear from the applicant or the representative. Then we will receive public testimony. Public comments shall be addressed solely to the chair and are limited to 4 minutes. Chris, please take roll.
Mr. Armstrong?
Here.
Mr. Dean?
Here.
Mr. Freed?
Here.
Ms. Jordan is absent. Mr. Kennard is absent. Ms. Lawson?
Here.
Ms. Messina?
Here.
Ms. Ringler?
Here.
Mr. Warner?
Here.
We have 7 in a quorum.
Thank you. First thing on the agenda is the approval of our minutes from October 15th meeting. Are there any questions, comments, corrections that need to be addressed?
I had one item. It may just be a typo. It's on Z5543K, and it's on the motion. It's got me listed. I was making the motion and seconding it. That's all.
It's on page 5.
Page 5, yes.
Anything else anyone caught? All right, hearing none, I'd entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve as amended as suggested by.
Correction?
Second.
Motion and second. Chris?
Mr. Armstrong?
Aye.
Mr. Dean?
Aye.
Mr. Freed?
Aye.
Ms. Lawson?
Aye.
Ms. Messina?
Aye.
Ms. Ringler?
Aye.
And Mr. Warner?
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
All right. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest, or ex parte communications for this meeting?
I have one on declaration of conflict of interest on public hearing item 1B. I have to recuse myself on that one.
Any others? We will move on to our action items on the agenda. The first item under public hearings is Z1808 by McDonald's Corporation. Mr. Nunabel?
Yes, good evening, Commissioners. This application is indeed for zoning reclassification from M1 two-family dwelling district to C2 commercial for a portion of property located at 3117 Southwest Topeka Boulevard. The proposed zone change will allow for the expansion of a parking area for an existing McDonald's restaurant. Staff is recommending approval of reclassification to C2 commercial, and are also recommending a portion be rezoned OS1 open space as appropriate in buffering the adjacent residential neighborhood. The size of the entire property is 1.57 acres, while the portion of property proposed for rezoning is approximately 1/5 an acre. The subject portion of property was rezoned from A, single-family dwelling district, to F, two-family dwelling district in 1960. The zoning regulations were subsequently amended, resulting in two-family districts being referred to as M1 two-family dwelling district. The existing restaurant and parking lot areas were constructed in 1981 with an expansion in 1995. In regard to zoning and characteristics of the surrounding property, a portion of the proposed property proposed for rezoning is located on the east side of Southwest Fillmore Street and is approximately 75 feet in width, while the existing restaurant, along with driveways and parking lot areas, are included on C2, and C4 zoning districts on the same property. The restaurant building itself actually overlaps both these districts. In regard to adjacent zoning, adjacent and north, C4 commercial, including offices and auto car wash to the northeast, and M1 and R1 residential with single-family residences to the northwest. Adjacent and west, R1 single-family dwelling district residential containing single-family residences. Adjacent and east across southwest Topeka Boulevard, C4 commercial with retail businesses. Adjacent and south, M1 two-family dwelling district, which is vacant, and C2 commercial, including commercial and contractor businesses, with R1 single-family beyond. The purpose intent of the proposed C2 commercial district is to provide for those commercial activities which serve a major part of the total community population. In addition to a variety of retail goods and services, these centers may typically feature a number of large traffic generators that require access from major thoroughfares. The purpose intent of the OS1 Open Space District is to preserve and protect existing and potential public land, open land, greenways, recreational space, floodways, and trails that have physical, aesthetic, or cultural characteristics which preclude their inclusion in other less restrictive districts. It is further the intent of this district to protect those areas from urban, non-open space, or incompatible development. The recommended OS1 zoning for the west 22 feet of the property maintains a buffer between the restaurant and residential use on the west side of Fillmore Street and north side of Southwest 31st Terrace. Retaining the current designation of M1 two-family dwelling district for a 22-foot wide of strip would have been, is rather, an alternative approach. However, planning staff consider OS1 to be more definitive and clear as to its intent and purpose. Under C2 zoning, the minimum lot area is 10,000 square feet and maximum building coverage is 50%. Maximum building size is 50,000 square feet ground floor area. Required off-street parking is determined by specific land use. Any future changes to the parking and circulation plan of the existing restaurant will be reviewed during the site plan review process. And this also is similar to landscaping. During the site plan review process, the required buffer yards will be reviewed. In regard to signage, ground signs within the C2 district are currently limited to a maximum height of 35 feet and maximum size of 200 square feet per sign face. The Topeka Land Use and Growth Management Plan 2040 includes the subject property and adjacent properties on both the west and east side of Southwest Topeka Boulevard on the future land use map as commercial. Regard to transportation and access, Southwest Fillmore Street and Southwest 31st Terrace are both classified as local streets, and neither currently include sidewalks. Rebuilding and expansion of the existing restaurant pursuant to the proposed rezoning anticipates no new access onto either of these local streets, but will continue to utilize existing access onto Southwest Topeka Boulevard, a principal arterial. The property is platted. However, the subject property consists of an amalgamation of vacated street right-of-ways and lots from two separate plats, UHL Subdivision and Barraclough Subdivision. The applicant intends to submit an application to replat the property into a single lot. The site is served by a full range of utilities and services, and the proposed change in zoning will have no anticipated impacts upon transportation or traffic within the area. As required, the applicant did conduct a neighborhood information meeting on November 12th. There was one attendee who sought confirmation that her property would not be adversely affected or directly affected by any rebuilding of the restaurant, and further voiced general support for the project. With regard to staff analysis as detailed in the report, regard to character of the neighborhood, the proposed C2 and OS1 zoning is compatible with the existing and desired future character of the neighborhood. Development of the property will require, as mentioned, an approved site and landscape plan to ensure adequate off-road parking, setbacks, and landscaping, including parking lot screening and adherence to parking lot lighting standards. The subject property has been vacant, has remained vacant through time, implying a lack of market demand for residential units permitted under the current M1 two-family dwelling district. Part of this has to do with the configuration of the property. It's approximately 75 feet in width, which is relatively shallow and is far short of the minimum lot depth of 110 feet per City of Topeka subdivision regulations. Given its shallow depth and surrounding commercial use, it is not well suited for residential development. Approval of the proposed zoning change will allow for the planned expansion of the existing restaurant pursuant to current setbacks, landscaping, and screening requirements, which along with the OS1 open space designation will minimize potential impacts on adjacent properties and residents. And this concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff from the commission at this point? Hearing none, I'd like to open this up for a public hearing. We'd like to first call on the property owner or his or her representative.
Good evening, Mark Bashamp with Olson, and Tom Doporowski is also here, the owner-operator, if you want to ask him any questions. But this all stems for the first step of when we met with city staff and realizing that we had multiple lots that McDonald's usually likes to clean those up and get those replatted into one lot, and also notice that the zoning was different. And so this is actually the start of the process for the redevelopment of that McDonald's. And it'll be, as you know, similar to, when you rebuild, to be similar to the one at 21st and Bell, and as far as the rebuild process. So, any questions?
Are there any questions from the commissioners? Thank you, we appreciate it. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this agenda item? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Commissioners, do you have any discussion points? Any thoughts?
I like the division using the OS for the western side of the rezoned area.
Seems to make sense to me as well, but any other thoughts? Would anybody like to make a motion?
Based on the findings and analysis in the staff report, I move to recommend approval to the governing body of the reclassification of the subject property from M1 two-family dwelling district to C2 commercial district and OS1 open space district for a rectilinear portion of the property that is 22 feet in width and immediately adjacent to Southwest Fillmore Street, public right-of-way.
There's a second. Thank you. We have a motion and a second to approve the recommended motion under staff recommendation. Chris?
Mr. Warner?
Aye.
Ms. Ringler?
Aye.
Ms. Messina?
Aye.
Ms. Lawson?
Aye.
Mr. Freed?
Aye.
Mr. Dean?
Aye.
And Mr. Armstrong?
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. We're going to move on to our next action item, which is the Haas property management. Mr. Warner said you had to step out, right? So we'll wait for Mr. Warner to step out.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Chairman. The property owner, Haas Property Management, has requested a rezoning from R1 Single Family Dwelling District to I1 Light Industrial District. The property is located at 3041 Northwest Highway 24 Frontage Road. It contains 3.22 acres. The future use of the property is for an unspecified retail trailer sales dealer with some associated outside storage and display of products. The existing house and accessory buildings were constructed around 1940, prior to the property being in the city. It was annexed in 1960. To the east of the site is the American Legion Post-Fraternal Hall, zoned into multiple family dwelling district. To the west of the site is the wooden yard waste mulching operation, zone PUD for I-1 uses. Pasture, grazing, and farming land lies to the south. And everything really along the frontage roads of Highway 24, north and south, is zoned for industrial uses. Other than the property to the immediate east, the south side of the frontage road is I-1 as well. The Land Use and Growth Management Plan 2040 does designate this property for commercial highway uses, and everything in the immediate area is also designated industrial. Much of the neighborhood, some of the uses along Highway 24 are those associated with ATV dealer and sales, farm and tractor supplies, tree and yard waste recycling, warehousing and storage. The fraternal hall has been lying to the immediate east since approximately 1920 with no known negative effects. The property's been zoned for single family since it was annexed in 1960. The existing residence and accessory buildings were constructed in 1940 before they were in the city. The Land Use and Growth Management Plan 2040 designates this property for commercial uses. That designation along Highway 24 is intended to allow uses for automobile, truck, trailer dealerships, and tractor or farm supply, warehousing, and other similar intensity light industrial or heavy commercial uses. Due to the mixture of light industrial and heavy commercial along the frontage road of Highway 24, the property is seen as no longer being suitable for R1 single-family dwelling district, and which is intended primarily for single-family dwellings, considering the I-1 zoning list exists along the frontage road of Highway 24. There being no anticipated substantial negative effects on surrounding properties from removal of the restrictions for the R1 zoning on the site. Staff is recommending approval of the I-1 light industrial district zoning. The applicants are here to take your questions if you have any. I am open for your questions as well. Thank you.
Are there any questions for staff at this point? All right, well, I will open this up for a public hearing. If the owner or the owner's representative would step forward.
I'm John Ladson with TGB Group. I'm out here on behalf of the owner, House Properties. I'm just here to answer any questions you may have.
Are there any questions? Guess not at this time.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to speak to this agenda item? All right, seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Any discussion for the commission? Seems reasonable to make it more in keeping with the surrounding properties to me.
Yeah, it seems more consistent with US 24 corridor and not to be residential.
It looks pretty stark by itself driving along that road out there.
Yeah. Is there a motion that would come up?
I'll make a motion based on the findings and analysis in the staff report. I move to recommend to the governing body approval the reclassification of the property from R1 Single Family Dwelling District to I1 Light Industrial District.
Second.
Chris?
Mr. Armstrong?
Aye.
Mr. Dean?
Aye.
Mr. Freed?
Aye.
Ms. Lawson?
Aye.
Ms. Messina?
Aye.
Ms. Ringler?
Aye.
Mr. Warner abstains, so motion passes 6-0 with one abstaining.
that concludes the public hearing section of the action items. We will call Mr. Warner back. There he is. We are going to move on to action items pertaining to the Sherwood Village subdivision. These are not public hearing items, so I'm going to first, we're going to hear about A 1802 William L. and Joyce G. Rowland requesting to annex into the city an approximate 9.2 acre subdivision on property located at 2400 Southwest Indian Hills Road. This is just a reminder that the governing body decides whether to approve annexations. The only role for the commission is to consider the proposed annexation and determine whether the proposed annexation is consistent with the land use and growth management principles in the comprehensive plan. It is then up to the governing body to decide whether to annex or not. So that is our role, and that is what we are determining tonight. So, Mr. Warner, or Bill, Mr. Finder, what's
Sure.
this?
Madam Chair, I'll just kick it off here. That was excellent. Took almost all of what I wanted to preface these next two items with. Mr. Warner will go into the annexation, and then Ms. Driver will go into the plat itself. I would recommend, again, we've kind of grouped these together because they're regarding the Sherwood Village subdivision, but I would go ahead and take action on separately. And then you're also, it's up to Chair and the Commission, if you want to treat this in the same process at least as we would a public hearing. If you take the staff's presentation, you hear from the owner, and if there are public comments, that is your choice. Since it's not a public hearing, it is not required. So unless there's any questions on that, I'll jump in. Mr. Warner.
Commissioners, I'll just remind again that this annexation is ultimately decided and only decided by the governing body. This happens to be a unilateral annexation, so the property owner has consented to annexation and the property is contiguous to the city boundary. So that is the process. We have a policy in our land use and growth management plan that states that annexations of this rough size should be reviewed by the Planning Commission for consistency with the comprehensive plan, land use and growth management plan. This particular property lies within Tier 2 of our land use and growth management plan of our urban growth area. Tier 2 areas are properties that have infrastructure and services already available, and by annexing these, or by developing these properties, we make the city more compact, and it's an affordable annexation. This particular property has urban development on the north, south, and east of it. It's essentially an infill subdivision. There are urban services available to this property and in the immediate area. Annexing this property does make the city more compact, and it is affordable. I will note that Southwest Indian Hills Road is currently a 2-lane arterial rural ditch section in this area between Southwest 21st and Southwest 29th. The property does take access to Southwest Indian Hills Road. Southwest 21st and Southwest 29th were improved to urban standards recently in this area. Given that this subdivision represents one of the final developments along this section of road, Southwest Indian Hills should be improved to an urban standard arterial in the near future. So staff's recommendation here is that annexing the subject property is consistent with the comprehensive plan, provided that Southwest Indian Hills is planned to be improved to an urban standard road as part of the city's next 10-year capital improvement plan, and also that the property is rezoned to R1 single-family dwelling district. With that, Commissioners, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
Mr. Warner, So back to that recommendation that annexing the property is consistent, provided that is in the 10-year CIP. Is it in the 10-year CIP, or are you suggesting that it should be in the 10-year CIP for this to go forward?
We're suggesting it should be in the 10-year CIP.
Other questions for staff?
So I'm confused. So if it's not in there, what happens if the road isn't added?
Commissioner Freed, your recommendation is to add it.
Oh, okay, so part of our recommendation is to add the
Yes.
road to the, okay.
Yes, because you also, in another month or two, you'll be making recommendations on the CIP that you
Okay.
were here last year, and so that would come up at that time anyway. We're just giving you a preview of what.
All right, thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, I also was.
That did help, thank you. I'd like to ask the commission if you think it would be helpful to hear from the public on this action item.
I don't see any reason not to follow our normal procedures and hear from the owner and anyone else if they're here.
Any other thought? At this time, I'd offer the opportunity for the property owner to come forward if they'd like to say anything.
Commissioners, I'm Rick Schmidt with Schmidt Beck and Boyd Engineering, representing Mr. Bill Rowland, who is the owner of this property. I really don't have any comment with regard to annexation. I mean, the rest of the comment will be regarding the plat, so if you have any questions, I'm here to answer.
Any questions at this time?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to speak specifically to the annexation issue in front of us right now?
And if I may, as people are coming up, we do follow the council rules at this moment. That's the practice that the commission has taken, so a 4-minute time, you'll hear a ding when you have a minute to go.
All right.
But you can extend more time upon request.
We need it.
Okay. I'm Connor Sable. I live at 2527 Southwest Wexford, which is a part of this annexation to become a through street. Currently is a dead end. And right now, speaking on behalf of the whole street, there's currently 34 kids that live on the street, and they range from, you know, high school to newborns. And I have 2 daughters, 4 and 12, and they both currently run and play all day. And I think the concern is that if we make this a through street coming from Indian Hills, that it will be a cut through for folks to get into the neighborhood. And with the kids running, you know, I guess we could be better parents and tell them, hey, don't play in the street, but it's a dead end, and, you know, we just kind of let them go. And I think the concern there is with the new development, folks aren't going to be aware of that and come flying through. Is there any way, or is there anything that we can bump in there to the annexation that's, you know, either not to connect 24th or to 24th Street in Wexford, or can we put some sort of like speed humps in or something like that to kind of deter people from going that way that wouldn't not normally go that way other than to cut through, I guess is my question. I mean, I'm just kind of bringing that as a point. I don't know what we can do here, but just kind of shedding some light on that. So if you have any questions of me.
Any questions for this speaker? Thank you, we appreciate your comments. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to the annexation?
Madam Chair, could I just make one comment? Mr. Sable, and to anyone else who would like to speak, the Planning Commission is making a very technical decision tonight But when this is up on the council agenda, you're more than welcome to come and speak and give your opinion as to whether the council should grant annexation or not. So you'll have another opportunity if you'd like. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other?
Brent Hall. I used to live at 7423 Southwest 23rd Terrace. And there was an issue, and I'm glad Sable came up and actually voiced his opinion about, the through street. 23rd Terrace was a nightmare, especially with my daughter when she was growing up. Thank God she never got hit. But I had words with Chad Manspeaker years ago, and we actually got a sign put up, but that's about it. Kids coming from Washburn Rural, I don't know, they're coming in, coming home. Yeah, it is a dangerous thing, especially with 34 kids. I just wanted to say, these kids' safeties, the safety of these kids is speed hump or something. We got to do something, and that sign didn't do anything. So.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Any questions for that speaker? Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this action item? Okay. Not seeing any commissioners, or is there any discussion? I hear the concerns about the traffic. I think that's addressed. Yeah, more.
Yeah, if I may, I'll jump in and try and help.
Yeah, thank you.
So you're right, those comments really are pretty germane to the plat, since that would be the dedication of the road.
Right.
The things that we're, under the annexation, we're looking at are the services in place? Is the infrastructure in place or planned to be in place? That sort of thing.
Okay. Looking at all those particulars, my opinion is that it does fit within the plan. Is there any other discussion about that or any other ideas?
I would agree with you.
Okay.
I would agree also.
Is there anyone who'd like to make a motion?
Well, I'll go ahead and I'll make a motion to recommend that to the city to annex the subject property that is consistent with the comprehensive plan, provided that Southwest Indian Hills Road is planned to be improved to an urban standard road as part of the city's next 10-year capital improvement plan, and the property is rezoned to R1 Single Family Dwelling District.
Any further discussion? All right, Chris?
Mr. Armstrong?
Aye.
Mr. Dean?
Aye.
Mr. Freed?
Aye.
Ms. Lawson?
Aye.
Ms. Messina?
Aye.
Ms. Ringler?
Aye.
Mr. Warner?
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Right, thank you. So we'll move on to the more detailed discussion of the Sherwood Village subdivision, their preliminary and final plat. Ms. Driver.
Thank you. This is a preliminary and final plat for Sherwood Village subdivision. The property is approximately 1,300 feet south of Southwest 21st Street, 600 feet west of Indian Hills Road, and north of 29th Street. As you heard tonight, there is a pending annexation on the property that's required to connect the city's sanitary sewer and water service. The property contains 9.21 acres. It's comprised of 33 lots, which is a density of 3.6 dwelling units per acre. Proposed land use is single-family dwellings. Currently, it's zoned RR1 Residential Reserve District. A upon the annexation, the planning commission will need to initiate a rezoning of the property to R1 Single Family Dwelling District, which would have to come back to you at some other meeting. The primary purpose of the plat is to extend Southwest 24th Terrace to its west property boundary, as well as extend Southwest Wexford Drive from the south and dedicate public right-of-way as necessary for those street extensions, as well as dedicate utility easements and drainage easements. The applicant has submitted a stormwater report that needs to be approved by the city engineer. That is still pending approval, needs to be completed prior to city council consideration. As noted in the stormwater report, it does indicate that the design of Miller's Reserve subdivision just to the north side of this initially accounted for this site to be developed as a part of the ultimate design for single-family residential lots. Two subdivision design variances are being requested with approval of the plat. One is a variance to the block dimensions that would allow the length of Block A to exceed the maximum block length of 1,200 feet. That being because Wexford Drive, there's no purpose in extending it to the north since the property to the north is already platted. There is a pedestrian access easement that's going to be added to the west side of Lot 9, Block C. The purpose, which is on the far west side of the subdivision, the purpose of that is to allow for a future sidewalk connection that would connect the sidewalk on Southwest Berkshire Drive with the sidewalk that will be provided on Southwest 24th Terrace. So you have some pedestrian connectivity if Berkshire Drive on the far west boundary of the subdivision is never extended through. The second variance is a variance to the dead-end length, temporary dead-end length exceeding 500 feet for 24th Terrace until the street's extended in the future, if and when it's extended in the future to connect with Berkshire Drive, if Berkshire is extended. The plat is dedicating a temporary turnaround easement as needed for public service providers at the end of the street, and they're also proposing to install a second additional fire hydrant on 24th Terrace for fire responders. At the time that street is extended, the temporary turnaround easement would be vacated. As Dan already mentioned, the property is in conformance to the comprehensive plan. Just a note on the density, the subdivision's residential density of 3.6 is comparable to surrounding development, although it is slightly higher from subdivisions to the north and south, the density of those. Just as a comparison, Miller's Reserve has a density of 1.5 dwelling units per acre. Sherwood Park has densities of 2 to 2.5 dwelling units per acre. However, the Land Use and Growth Management Plan also encourages greater densities in new neighborhoods than what was previously developed in the past. Staff is recommending approval of the subdivision plat, subject to the conditions in the staff report. There are a couple of additional items I need to add to the conditions. One that were inadvertently left off by the consultant. One is a vacation of the note on the preliminary plat about the vacation of the detention pond on Block C, which was intended to be on there. And then a note on the final plat about the temporary turnaround being rescinded for public use once the street is extended. I am open for any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Are there any questions for the staff at this time?
Could you please repeat, Ms. Driver, that part about the detention pond note that we're adding?
There's a note on the preliminary plat, as you can see. There was formerly the detention pond on the north side of Sherwood Park. That has to be vacated. And then they're addressing this design by providing a drainage easement that will then take the water to the detention pond that's now constructed in Miller's Reserve subdivision to the north. that note, from what I understand, it was, that easement was granted back in 2000 by separate instrument, and it has to be noted in order to be vacated on the plat.
Are there any other questions for staff at this time?
I had one more. Just talking about connectivity of Wexford Drive to 24 Terrace itself, how does that process go when the developer approaches the city and says, hey, we're going to infill this with a potential subdivision? How is connectivity considered and or encouraged in development like this?
Commissioner Armstrong, good question. The subject street or Wexford, in this case, was platted always with the idea that it would connect to the north. And so that was actually planned when Sherwood Park was originally platted and approved. And so basically in this case, we are following through on that original plan to connect. When we review it again to make sure that that is something that's a good thing or not a good thing, or is advisable, we look at our subdivision regulations for block length. We also look at our comprehensive plan that is also encouraging more connectivity within neighborhoods. The number of lots here are not substantial at all that are being added to the traffic patterns. It's 33 lots. So at most, when this is built out, you have about 300 trips a day. And if you put all those onto Indian Hills, that's probably less than 1%. So it is really not a traffic analysis or traffic issue per se. It is a neighborhood connectivity issue. And we would encourage it, even from a traffic standpoint. The more as a neighborhood develops and grows, the more access points and diversification in entries and traffic ways through and into a neighborhood actually diffuses the impact of traffic. So just imagine if you had one road that all the traffic came in on, and then it went to a bunch of cul-de-sacs. Well, all the traffic would be going on one street. By having some connectivity with grid system helps to then diffuse your choice of how you take a trip through a neighborhood. In this case, now you're going to have folks actually have a choice to go two ways on Wexford as opposed to just one way as you open it up. So we think from that standpoint it helps. It also helps all modes of transportation, including biking and pedestrian transportation. So you couldn't really do that without connecting. So those are all the advantages, and you can become, and you also can get a more compact pattern in the city. We can have more cost-effective service and infrastructure investment go into areas because we do have that sort of density. We can't get there if we have dead-end streets everywhere. So it helps connect, but it also helps become more compact. So those are some of the review. That's more of a comprehensive plan type review. The technical review and the subdivision regulations really comes down to some block lengths and connections. So there's a standard block length, and then if it went beyond that, you would have to give a variance to that. So the subdivision regulations themselves encourage connectivity or certain block lengths that don't run on forever. There's a sort of avoids the runway effect, where you just have a runway of a through street that goes through a neighborhood, which we don't want. And I would note that Wexford would dead end and not go further north. So it's not a through street, which is good for a local street. It's not a collector, so that's good.
Thank you. And then looking at that subdivision to the south, the other two non-cul-de-sac north-south streets, you potentially also set up to connect in the future, Berkshire Drive, Chauncey, similar to Wexford, if this would?
Yeah, I think they alternate. I think
Right.
is what the plan was, and that's a planned design so that you can have connectivity every other street. So yes, that is the future.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for staff at this point? I think I did hear Ms. Driver say, as far as the block length, there is a variance in this one, right?
For
Because of the
block
north
A.
side?
Yes.
Yeah.
Ms. Driver, on the property to the west, is that already platted?
The property, no, the property to the west is not platted, so we don't know.
I have one more quick question. So we wouldn't, without the connection to Wexford, are there also an emergency services issue without being able to serve something of that length without getting multiple access points?
Thank you, Commissioner Armstrong. I did not mention, block lengths are also important for emergency services, so having two ways in and out of a block, or a street, or a neighborhood, or multiple points, again, lessens the response time by emergency providers, which we know any seconds and minutes count. So that's another one that we mentioned, but I forgot to mention, yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Again, I'd like to take comments from the public, just reiterating that we have a limited scope of what we're taking into consideration and what our recommendation is to the city council. So again, if the property owner or his representative would like to speak.
Yeah, Rick Schmidt with Schmidt, Beck and Boyd Engineering. Representing Mr. Rowland, we don't have any problem with the staff report, and we're in agreement with all the recommendations. Here to stand for any questions if you have any.
Any questions for the speaker?
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to this agenda item?
Hi, everyone. James Unger. I live at 2504 Southwest Wexford Drive, so I am right on the end of this proposed extension. My job, I work with farmers and ranchers, and part of what I do is I make recommendations to improve their land. Any recommendations that we make must improve or maintain the quality of what they have out there for themselves as well as their neighbor's land. We cannot create additional problems or detriment to the neighbor's land as well. And so in buying a home, you know, when each of us are buying a home, we're not buying just a house that's a dwelling. We're buying we're investing financially. We're buying in a neighborhood. We're buying in a safe place for our family. That these are all investments that we're making in that home. And, oh, excuse me. And so this, our neighborhood, Sherwood Park, it's a very, as already mentioned, family-oriented neighborhood. We would like to keep it a family-oriented neighborhood. The proposed lots to the north, they're very small and leave limited opportunity for developing homes of the same type and size and lots. And what this can create, from my understanding in the construction of these proposed lots, is that they're going to be slab developments. Slab homes do have a notoriety for encouraging non-family inhabitants, and so this is something, you know, that could be of detriment to us, you know, and my family, the rest of the families on the block in the neighborhood. You know, the other part of that is obviously you're talking about developing homes that are less valuable than those to the north of them and to the south of them. And this will obviously create less tax opportunities. There's going to be less people interested in moving into even our neighborhood. You talk about your responsibility being growth and development, and I'd hope that would be in a beneficial and positive manner to everyone that's residing in this area. I just do not feel that these lots, the lots themselves, the size of the lots would be a benefit in that manner for the reasons that I've stated. It also talks about, needing a variance and connecting our streets there. I don't necessarily see, I understand that that's a temporary dead end on Wexford Drive where we are located. But to create just an additional variance so that they can develop this property as they're suggesting is just extending the issue. And I'd also venture to wonder, you mentioned the density of Sherwood Park being anywhere between 2 to 3.5, is that correct? Is that what I understood? I was curious where the 3.5 was at, if it was.
No, I said 2 to 2.5.
2 to 2.5, okay, so it's more than slightly higher in density than what there is on the bordering north neighborhood and the south. My other question is, in the proposed neighborhood to the north, Miller's Reserve, it was originally proposed to extend into Miller's Glen, to create through access. That's clearly neighborhoods with the same aspects, same property values, so on and so forth. But in the way that this development's proposed, it would be creating two entirely separate neighborhoods, in essence, between Sherwood Park to the south and the Sherwood Village.
Do you have any further comments? Are there any questions for the speaker? I just wanted to clarify, I think the variance is just that north part. It doesn't have to do with the Wexford cutting through, right? It just has to do with the fact that it doesn't cut all the way through. It creates a very long block on the north side, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
From Wexford to the dead end, yes.
Okay.
Greater than 500 feet. So if Wexford didn't cut through, you'd have an even longer dead end.
Okay. Thank you for your comments, I appreciate it. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to this action item?
My name is Michael Bush. I'm 2522 Southwest Wexford Drive. My concerns are the same as Mr. Sable and Mr. Unger with the traffic coming through if Wexford is a through street. There are, as Mr. Sable said, 34 kids right now on that neighborhood. And the safety is my number one concern with those kids. Is right now, with no sidewalks on Indian Hills, there's no access to 21st or 29th Street to get anywhere. Also, we talked about the size in conjunction with the surrounding neighborhoods, and that is one of my other concerns is, as Mr. Unger pointed out, is the size of the dwellings that potentially go up in the new proposed area, and also the increased crime that can happen and is happening in our neighborhood right now is on the through streets. There is an increase, or there is a lot of crime on mailbox theft and porch theft. And, right now we're fortunate on Wexford, with that being a dead end, we do not have that crime. And so on a through street, that's just added access for the thieves to come through. So, appreciate your time.
Any questions? Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to this agenda item?
Evening, Madam Chairperson. I'm Kyle Pogue. I live at 2512 Southwest Santa Fe Court. If you look at the plot map, our backyard is against those detention ponds that are supposed to be removed. We lived in this property for less than 2 years, and it's already almost filled up once from heavy rainfall. We're concerned about how this stormwater will be handled with this new addition. I understand there's a city engineer that had some concerns with this as well. I understand there's potentially an issue with that. I understand what that issue was, but I'd like to know more information about that if I could. Perhaps at the city council meeting that will be expanded upon. But again, that is our main concern right now with the water retention, how that would be handled, the stormwater removing from that area. I walked in that area, in that stormwater area about 6 weeks ago after the heavy rainfall from October, and there's still water sitting in those detention ponds. So I guess I'm concerned how that water would be moved in any kind of expedient way with additional development in that area.
Any questions for the speaker? Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to this agenda item?
Hi, my name is Michelle Fox, and I live on Wexford Drive too. I guess my big thing about this whole subdivision development is it's so different than Sherwood Park or the Miller's Reserve that's being built in the fact that the density is so much higher. I guess as a mom, I don't want to see it get overcrowded with cars. It frustrates me that Wexford is the only connection point. I wish that instead of getting a variance for the long stretch on the north, that it would go into that subdivision as well. I feel like he's trying to cram as many houses into this small piece of land as he can, and I guess that kind of bothers me. I would like to see our neighborhood continue as it was. It was my understanding a long time ago when he had a meeting at Miller's Glen to make the Miller's Reserve. It was back in like 2013, that Sherwood Park would be extended. So we always knew that that would happen, but we always kind of thought it would be the same as our neighborhood. It wouldn't necessarily be a ton of houses crammed into this spot. So I guess that's my argument. For many, many years, for the past 14 years, it's been open space cornfield. And then it comes into this where we're going to cram 33, 34 houses into under 10 acres. You have no extra green space. He's not proposing a park or walkways or anything like that. So, yeah, I guess as a homeowner, a mom, I'm one of the moms of actually it's 36 kids on our street. I just really wish that he would go back to the drawing board and make the lots bigger. And if you're gonna extend this, make it more fitting of the two neighborhoods that are already there. Make it lot sizes that encourage families instead of possibly rentals and things of that nature. That's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Is there any questions for the speaker? Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to this agenda item?
Hello, my name's Greg Stevie. I live at 2739 Southwest Chauncey Court. I agree with most of the comments coming. The lot sizes here, in my opinion, are too small. The continuity of the north development and the south development, if we bring that together and make it seamless, I think it'd be great. Putting a small slab-on-grade home development in the middle of these very nice neighborhoods, in my opinion, would be flawed. Do you folks, wherever you live, do you want a smaller division stuck in the middle of your neighborhoods that could potentially drive down your property values? We certainly don't. So if it fits and matches the rest of the neighborhoods to the north to the south, I think it's wonderful. We've got to have progress. This land needs to be developed, but it needs to be developed consistently with the neighborhoods to the north and to the south. I'm taking into account all the other issues, but a lot of folks from the neighborhood have asked me to speak as well, so this is, something we want to make sure you folks hear. But thank you all for your time.
Sure. Thank you. Any questions? Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to this agenda item?
Good evening, Adam Prophet, resident Sherwood Park. I'll be very brief this evening. Basically, as a commission, you guys are charged with taking facts and making a decision for what's best in the city. And some of the facts from this evening are that we're making 3 exceptions already for this neighborhood. One is that Indian Hills, as stated, should be expanded and enhanced. It's not yet. We're kind of putting the cart before the horse there. 2, we're making a longer block than what is typically accepted in new development. That's another exception. And 3, it is more dense than to the north and the south. I think somebody said that it's not that much more dense, but I believe the highest that Sherwood Park got was 2.5. This one at 3.3 is 33% more dense than the others. So think about that in terms of a paycheck. If you get a 33% pay cut, that's substantial. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to this agenda item? Okay. Commissioners, are there any questions after hearing from those speakers? Questions for the staff? Discussion points that you'd like to talk about? Mr. Armstrong?
Yeah, I guess, question about the development to the north. If connectivity is key to circulation in neighborhoods, why was that one kind of isolated with its own access point only and not planned to connect to the south as Sherwood Park was to the north?
Commissioner Armstrong, I believe that was intended to match up eventually with Miller's Glen to the north. And if I recall, yes, so the street does go a little further north there. So there is a connection to the north the development of Miller's Glen and Miller's Reserve were more in keeping, I think, with what they were trying to accomplish with that. We've got some private streets to the north there as well that we really shouldn't be connecting public streets up to. So it's, you know, when you come down to it, it's a bit of a jigsaw puzzle. You're trying to fit pieces in here. I think that was we landed on making sure that there was connection within the development itself. Connecting further south, though, I would have some concern if it just connected because then you'd have even more cause for trips to be on a local street than you need to have. But it just was not planned to connect.
So the detention pond could potentially go away within Miller's Glen, and then that would connect across, is that?
You'd have to ask the owner plans for that. I don't think staff knows.
Okay.
Are there other questions for staff? Am I correct in understanding that the issues with the detention pond and the water, the runoff, are those finalized, or are those still in planning?
They're being reviewed.
They're being reviewed, okay. And so if the review comes back that this is not a good plan, is there recourse after that?
I think you may want to, if the applicant's representative may be able to answer your question.
Okay.
Madam Chair, yes, there is they have to have an approved stormwater plan.
So
this is not going to go forward to City Council without that.
Okay. The other question I had about density, I know we've been talking about the neighborhoods to the north and the south. What about the neighborhoods to the east? Those look to be much more dense than, at least on the plat map here.
Go ahead.
Yes, they are. I looked at some of those subdivisions, 5 of those subdivisions to the east, and they average at about 3.7 dwelling units per acre. So yes, they are more dense, which they're probably more comparable. They are more comparable to this density, the density of this subdivision.
Is there any other questions for staff?
I have a question. In reading the conformance to the comprehensive plan, it says that it's greater density in surrounding subdivisions. However, the plan encourages greater residential densities for newer neighborhoods than what has previously been developed. Does that plan take into account whether the density is being of a new subdivision in relation to the neighboring subdivisions when it makes that recommendation?
I wouldn't, Commissioner Freed, I would not consider, in this case, these to be incompatible by any means. When we look at more density or higher density, we set a range, and for our preferred density, which is 3 to 5, and that's what can support urban services in a cost-effective manner. That doesn't mean you can't do something of a lower density. It just is something that's one of those factors. So when we look at compatibility, which I think is what your question is this, do we look at compatible densities? Yeah, I think we do. I don't think that's something you want to disregard. I think we have to look at that and recognize, is this, how much of a departure is it, given the area? So, yeah, I do think we do that.
I was reading through some of the information that was in our packet, correspondence with, between the city staff and various property owners that had written in. Ms. Driver had answered several of those. Specifically, she was talking about the zoning code does not regulate whether these sites are built homes or pre-manufactured homes, provided a pre-manufactured home meets the following standards. There's another one where she talks about, the zoning doesn't regulate what type of housing. Can someone explain more about that? What regulations do impact size? I don't know, any other kind of regulation that would impact the size of a building or the type of a building put on those lots?
Size of building.
The zoning has dimensional standards, so it meets the dimensional standards of R1 zoning.
Okay. If someone wanted to buy 2 lots and put a big house on it, would that be allowed?
Yes. The lots, in the older parts of Topeka, you have 25-foot wide lots, but they were combined for any variation of size of house that people wanted to build at that time. Same thing here, you could combine the lots. And to maybe answer your question and maybe where this is going, so you as a commission are looking, does this subdivision conform to the subdivision regulations? And within that, does that conform to what our anticipated zoning regulations would be, as well as our comprehensive plan? So the minimum dimensions in both in subdivision and zoning absolutely would be met. We're looking at 65, 70-foot wide type lots here. What is our minimum in R1? Is 60? So 60. The depth is 110 minimum. These are 130 plus. So they would definitely meet our R1 zonings of a minimum lot size of 6,500 square feet. That is that's our lowest density zoning district. So they do meet that minimum. And then in terms of what is built on the lot, that is something we do not have control other than through the setbacks. And the setbacks, in this case, in an R1 setting, would be 7 feet on the side and 30 feet in the front and the back. So you're still going to have the same setbacks as all the neighborhoods would to the south, to the east, to the north. So the setbacks on the property are the same. The only thing that, as you can see, would be a narrower lot. As to the size of the building, that is not something we would, or you or staff can control beyond the setbacks. The building envelope has any further.
Any other questions or thoughts, discussion points?
Yeah. So I was just looking at the different sizes of the new subdivision proposed and comparing them to what's on the, at least along Wexford that I can see on here. And, yeah, it looks like there's about a third. There's 33 lots proposed. There's about 12, 13 that are similar size. So it's hitting it only at about a third compared to the Sherwood Park, number 6. So that would be my only concern. I don't have a problem with the connection of Wexford. It was planned that way a number of years ago. It's going to be that way for every other street in there that's not a cul-de-sac. So I don't have a problem with that. I do have a concern with maybe some of the size of some of the smaller lots, the other 2/3 of them.
Any other thoughts? Concerns?
And I understand they meet the requirements, so you have to look at that also.
So just to reiterate, the staff analysis is recommending, Planning Department recommends the preliminary and final plat phase for Sherwood Village be approved with the following conditions. And there was several stated there. Most of them are just notes that need to be updated. Does anybody have strong feelings either for or against that recommendation?
And I'm not sure this comes across in the report, but we might as well just reiterate. The subdivision regulations do require you to conform to the comprehensive plan. So that's your out or you're in, depending on how you're viewing this. So you meet those technical specs. Do you feel like it's still consistent with the comprehensive land use and growth management plan? Then that is fair game.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with difference in densities generally, and I'm not even concerned with the different styles of residence would be done. It's just generally you kind of grade it along a line. You don't have large and then suddenly a bunch of small and then going back to larger lots.
Sure.
So that's what's causing me concern. It just doesn't feel like that's a well thought out plan.
I think it's my hesitation that the road was meant to be attached to all along. So no one should be surprised that the road's getting connected to, but I think I would probably have the expectation had I bought a home over on the south, that where it connects to would probably be similar in size and density. So I think my biggest concern though is the lot size, and even when we talk about, it was brought up maybe slab on grade, I can also see that being a good thing for retirees. So if smaller houses, slab on grade, that doesn't necessarily concern me as much as the lot size itself.
I mean, I see the point, those are valid points, I see that. I also see the, what the staff was talking about as far as trying to improve density. We all pay for public services, and we need to be conscious of how those are distributed, and who all pays for those. And so the more people that chip in, the less everybody has to pay towards it. But, so that's one side of that coin. And it comes down to the question of, do we feel like this meets the land use and growth management plan? Does anybody want to make a motion to see where we go? How about this? How about, I'm going to make a motion based upon the findings and the staff analysis, the planning department. I move that we approve and forward to the city council for its acceptance of this land to be dedicated, or forward to the city council approval that they approve, a recommendation that they approve the preliminary and final plat phase of Sherwood Village subdivision with the conditions noted in the staff analysis. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Okay. Chris, would you take a vote?
You want to do any more discussion?
Or any more discussion about that before we proceed?
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify in terms of what our task is here tonight, in this statement that the owner is permitted to divide their property in a manner that complies with the City of Topeka Subdivision Regulations, TMC 18.30. And a rezoning change from RR1 Residential Reserve District to R1 Single Family Dwelling District will come later and will be either initiated by the applicant or the Planning Commission. Is that correct?
That is correct. We would come back with a zoning change.
So that would come later.
Yeah, I mean, I agree this meets all the hurdles that it has to do for it to be subdivided in this manner. I don't know that I would have chosen to do lot sizes of this magnitude, but again, I think it does conform with what we're set criteria we're supposed to look at, so.
With that, I think our motion second stands.
Mr. Warner?
No.
Ms. Ringler?
Aye.
Ms. Messina?
No.
Ms. Lawson?
Aye.
Mr. Freed?
Aye.
Mr. Dean?
Aye.
Was that an aye?
Aye.
And Mr. Armstrong?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-2 with none abstaining.
So my understanding is that this goes to city council, and like was stated earlier, there's an opportunity there as well to talk with the city council, right,
Correct.
to have comment there.
Correct. This will be posted probably at earliest January 15th for city council consideration, assuming stormwater plan is worked out.
Okay.
Yep.
Next item on our action items is ACZR 1803, which is the Visual Code Update 2. Mr. Warner?
Commissioners, we are bringing back, I'm sorry. The Topeka governing body remanded back the Topeka non-residential design standards at their October 23rd meeting. The vote was 6-3 to remand back the standards for you to consider adding language concerning art features. So we have a couple recommendations for that, and also, in addition, we're proposing another option for you to consider with some changes to the window and door requirements. So, first thing I want to talk to you about are the art features. The first change that we are proposing is to include art as an element that can be selected through the alternate compliance process. So you might remember we have an alternate compliance process when a development or a building is not meeting either building materials, window doors, architectural details. There's a process to go through alternate compliance and choose one of the items listed in the list to make up for what's lacking and overall comply through design. So in that list of elements, we're adding art as one of those elements. We're quite happy to do that. I think it makes a lot of sense, actually, to do that. I will read it real quick here. Addition of art that is placed prominently on the site, viewable from the public street, integrated with the design of the building site, and permanent. Art includes, but is not limited to, murals, sculptures, integrated architectural or landscape architectural work. So again, no mandate to select art as part of your design. It's merely an option to possibly add through alternate compliance. The second item is to include art as an architectural detail. So again, you might remember we have a list of architectural details that designers can choose from to comply with that standard, and art is added there, and simply art is art that is integrated into the facade. So as an example, the docking building at 10th and Topeka has some carved friezes attached to the building at various places. That would be an example where we would give credit for having art on the building that's integrated into the facade. So again, a very good idea, something that really should be in the standards. So I will stop there and see if there's any questions about art features and the addition into the design standards.
Questions or thoughts?
No, just a comment. I watched the replay of this city council meeting. I think this discussion spurred somewhat out of our inner city visit to Chattanooga, Tennessee, and some of the artwork that we saw as a part of that. And I totally support integrating it in this fashion as well.
I will note that the art that we're talking about in the commercial design standards is on private property. So this is, they have to locate it within their site to get credit for it, basically. Okay.
So, would that be permanent art features or temporary?
So it would have to be permanent. So an example of that, there's also on Topeka Boulevard right around 10th, just north of the Pizza Hut, there's those two brick, two-story commercial buildings. There's a big piece of art in front of that one building, so that would be an example of integrating it into the site, I guess. Okay. So another option for you to consider, not an option that was directed by the governing body, but one that we had reached when, so we continued to test the design standards between governing body action and this meeting, and I really came to realize that our window and door standards probably weren't going to work very well. And we want to make sure that these standards are a Topeka model, that work for Topeka. So there's two changes there, one to the way we calculate the window and door percentages, and then also a change to the actual percentages required for A, B, and C buildings, which we lowered 5% for each one of those. So we think that will get us closer to having projects comply And I think one thing also to note is, as hopefully when these get adopted and we go through, actual use of them, and we run into things over and over again, those are the types of things we will probably come back and change in the future. This is meant to be kind of a living ordinance, I guess. So any questions?
If I may, so before it was an upper limit of 20 feet, so now we're going to go to a standard height of 12 or less, so that significantly reduces it then, right?
It does. We had settled on that 20 feet in the technical committee, but it was an average roof. So the way it did read was an average facade roof line with an upper limit of 20. So we didn't want where there was a roof element going way up above the standard. We didn't want to penalize them for having to go to that height. But what we found is it's just going to work. Most first levels are not going to be that high anyway. They're probably going to be at 25 or 12 or 11 or 10. So we don't even want to get above 12 really to start calculating these things. We think it'll work proportionally better with the calculation for the windows and doors.
It's still the roof line height, though.
Right, yes, exactly.
You can have a roof at 12 feet and your facade is up at 20 feet. That was the whole idea, that we were trying to avoid having to be penalized for all that square footage.
Yes, exactly.
So it makes sense. I agree.
Are you asking that we consider these individually or together?
Together.
Any further discussion? I mean, I think the art thing is great. The other change seems like a reasonable recalculation. But any other thoughts or questions? Otherwise, I take a motion.
Yeah, I'd move that we recommend to the governing body approval of changes to TMC 18275 concerning the addition of art features to alternative compliance and architectural details, and changes to TMC 18.275 concerning changes to the window door requirements.
Second.
Been a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Mr. Armstrong?
Aye.
Mr. Dean?
Aye.
Mr. Freed?
Aye.
Ms. Lawson?
Aye.
Ms. Messina?
Aye.
Ms. Ringler?
Aye.
And Mr. Warner?
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
All right, last on our agenda, discussion items, the visual code update 3. Mr. Hall.
So, Madam Chair, the slideshow still needs to come up. Just wait a minute if that's okay.
Okay.
Now that we have you warmed up,
Okay. So, presented to you for your consideration tonight, just for the benefit of people in the audience might not know this. This is presented to you for discussion and feedback, not for action tonight. There is quite a lot of information in here, but just wanted to be clear about that. So, we're at the point now where we are pretty close to being finished presenting details about particular types of signs. And we're at that point where we're at incidental, temporary, and portable message center signs. So, a couple things driving. Thank you. Thank you. It's probably a little better. One thing I want to recognize too, in the audience we have Virginia Baumgartner and Cindy Proett, who are part of our sign code committee. They've put a lot of time in to attending meetings, and just want to express my appreciation for them being here tonight. They've provided us a lot of useful, practical input from a sign industry perspective. So the need to address and consider standards for incidental signs and temporary signs and the portable message centers really is driven by a couple different things. One is the visual appeal survey that we conducted and presented to you early this year that had some interesting findings in it. But also the Reed versus Gilbert, Arizona case, in which a man named Reed took the town of Gilbert to court, ultimately to the U.S. Supreme Court, based on restrictions on temporary signs. Essentially, Reed was being treated differently than other users of temporary signs. He had a sign that advertised his church. He was a pastor of a local church. He'd advertised his church, and he placed his signs around the city. And he did so in the same manner as political signs were being used. But the Gilbert Code treated political signs different than other forms of temporary signs. And he said that's not fair, it shouldn't be treated differently. And the U.S. Supreme Court sided with Reed and determined that any content-based restrictions like that were unconstitutional. So in this case, you had to read the sign to know that it was a political sign versus a other type of temporary sign, so those were content-based restrictions. So what that also found is that content-based regulation is unconstitutional with a few minor exceptions. The minor exception being off-premise signs. You have to read a billboard to know that it's a billboard, probably. But it affirmed what's long been understood, that regulations must be based on time, place, and manner restrictions, but they still need to serve a substantial interest. So that is a lot of what is behind our recommendation about temporary signs. There's not this, we have temporary sign standards now, there's not this feeling that, oh, we have to make our temporary sign standards a lot more restrictive. That's not really the case, but we do need to accommodate signs based on their construction, time, place, and manner type restrictions first on their content. So in other words, if you have a sign standard that regulates real estate signs, that's a content-based restriction, and that doesn't fly. So just as you might recall from the visual appeal survey, this is one of the images. This image is of multiple yard signs, what we call yard signs, a form of temporary signs. There's also a banner on some poles that's in the grass there. So 92% of the responses were unappealing. This is a banner, what we call a freestanding banner. It's a banner on two poles mounted in the ground. The response on this one was 72% of those responses were unappealing. So 72% of the responses, people responding to that image, said that they were either very unappealing or somewhat unappealing. These are temporary banners on a liquor store. The result of the survey was 91% of the responses unappealing. Portable message center, ubiquitous type of sign in Topeka. The appeal survey was pretty overwhelming. 95% of the responses were unappealing. So first cover temporary signs. Temporary signs are a lot of different types, and they seem to, there's a lot of innovation, I guess, in the temporary sign industry. They come up with different types of signs, and what we are trying to do is accommodate them, the types of signs that staff is recommending that be regulated, restricted. There are some forms of temporary signs that are really not really a problem. It might be more of a problem if you try to regulate them, if you don't. I'll get to those in a minute. So the types of freestanding signs are yard signs, freestanding banners, feather flags, air-activated signs, balloons basically, ground mounted banners. Non-freestanding temporary signs are primarily banners and posters. The other types of signs I was mentioning, people signs, that's like tax season, you get somebody out there in front of the tax place with a funny outfit on with a big sign, that's a people sign. Vehicle sign is someone has a vehicle with a big sign on the side of it, they park it in front of their business. That's a form of signage. Window signs, they're used as temporary signs, but they can also be permanent signs. There might be another way to regulate those that's not part of our temporary sign code. So just some images for you, just to help you understand what we're talking about. Yard signs, typically on these wire frames or some other type of thing that can be pushed into the ground, and not necessarily of a durable material. It's kind of a flimsy material, a temporary type of material. These are the freestanding banners. Currently, our code does not allow these. These are not permitted currently. So in the packet, in the report to you, we have the standards. We have a summary of what the standards say now, and this is what we're proposing. So as you look at this, if you look through here, you've seen the tables, and that table is somewhat, if you go to the first table under temporary signs, so it would be page 2A. So these are the standards we're recommending for yard signs and freestanding banners. And this table is very intimidating. So I'm going to try to take a little bit of that out of this, the intimidation factor out of it. We did this kind of as a way to so you and we, as we were drafting these, could look at how the signs fit into these different types of zoning districts. But this is, what's on the screen here is a summary of how it applies to not every district, but most of the districts. So it's simpler than it appears in the table. I just want to clarify that. So what we're recommending is the length of time permitted, maximum 4 time periods in a year, 30 days per time period, and 120 days per calendar year. That applies to all districts except residential uses in the RM and OS1 district. OS1 is open space district. M is a type of residential district. That is different than the current code in that the current code says events, and I think it's maximum 2 events a year. It doesn't define what an event is, so this takes that ambiguity out of it. Number, currently it's 1 per property. We're recommending 1 per 200 feet of street frontage in all districts except residential uses in RM and OS1 districts. So this is less restrictive than what it is currently. And this scales it for the size of the property. Height, 6 feet, that's generally what it is in most of the districts currently. Area, this is a little different. It's not a lot different, but it's a little different in that it limits it to 16 square feet, 32 square feet if it's set back 10 feet or more. Any questions about that?
What is the magnitude of the enforcement necessary to monitor such a table?
I would say the magnitude is high. I don't know how else to answer that, honestly. We enforce by complaint, and but other than that, one thing we do enforce is if there are temporary signs in the right of way, we have a crew that goes around and just takes those out of the right of way and puts them in a place to be picked up later.
Yeah, I may add, because I'm very concerned about the administration of a sign code, i.e. enforcement. We have 1 person that covers 60 square miles of the city to enforce this. So whatever we come up with, whatever you look at, we have to keep that in mind. She's, and actually that is she's part of our committee that looks at this. So it's an extremely valid question, and one that those are the color of my glasses when I look at this is this enforceable? Is it reasonable to enforce? Because we are not requiring, we're not going into the permit recommendation for temporary signs, certainly not these. So it has to be easily understood and reasonably enforceable. Yeah, agreed. So,
I'm just kind of curious, what a construction sign, like on a construction fence, what does that fall under? Is that a temporary sign?
That, by its construction and its use, it's a temporary sign. That is something that's, we're a little bit puzzled by. We are looking for a way to address that, so it's not treated exactly like a temporary sign. But again, we're limited by legally what you can do. It wouldn't be advisable to have a type of sign called a construction sign in your code. But, yeah, that is something we're thinking about.
Mike's going to get into incidental signs here in a minute, and so we are looking at, there are such signs that are just, well, he'll describe incidental to the property, and that could be a way we look at construction signs.
So are these applicable then also to political signs?
Yes. Yes.
So, because there's a difference then for the R&M that's more restrictive in OS1.
Correct. Political signs, as you might be aware of, Commissioner Freed, the legislature passed a statute that allows political signs to be located in the right-of-way and is less restrictive than our code. We've discussed that with our consultant, who's also an attorney. And at this time, the advice is that we can't tell someone they can't put up a sign if the statute permits it.
Okay.
So this is a type of sign that's proliferated in recent years, and currently our code doesn't really allow this because these signs are a lot of these are about 15 feet tall, about 24 square feet. So what we're recommending is that they do be accommodated and treated as freestanding temporary signs. This is a little different than what staff is recommending on the other freestanding signs, is that this is more limited for time periods a year, but limited to 15 days per time period. So 60 days per calendar year, so more restrictive. Again, I mentioned the height is different, 24 square feet is different. 24 square feet, I think that accommodates what needs to be accommodated, but that's something we probably need to verify. But it's not going to be much bigger than that if it's allowed much bigger than that.
And I'll throw an editorial note in, as Mike hit upon, the reason these would be treated a little differently is just that surely their size. Also, there's some, they're not as, they would deteriorate quicker, I think, than the plastic or other materials for temporary signs. We currently don't, we currently allow them, or I should say, we currently do not enforce them not being allowed, because our current code only allows 6 feet in height. So to rewrite the code, we would have to accommodate their height, and that is what the purpose of these recommendations would do. But our current practice is if you see them around town, we would allow one per property currently, and that's our practice.
Thank you.
I do have a question, and maybe I should ask this long, but it seems to me these are a little different than more permanent signs when we're talking about PUDs. So how do these apply to PUD zoning?
So PUD zoning could take what you're seeing up here and rewrite whatever you're seeing up here. And unless we call it out that is something we should do, then these regulations would take its place. Would be the governing regulation in effect for that PUD. So
But do PUDs, I mean, because we haven't done a lot of PUDs since I've been on here, but PUDs are like their own zoning, so do we, if we don't assign them one of these zoning ranges, then how do they fit within this regulation?
It would be, unless you are explicit in terms of your temporary sign regulation for that PUD, it would just default to that zoning district that is identified on the PUD. We usually have a use group on the PUD. It says C4 use group, so it would be the C4 regulations.
Thank you. I get that.
So, Mr. Hall, I bring this up sometimes when we talk about height, it's from the ground up. I've recently seen feather flags on top of buildings. So is that taking into consideration 16 feet, like from the bottom of the pole?
From grade.
Okay.
From
So
grade.
just something for us to
Yeah.
think about, but yeah, there's been several of them on top of buildings I've seen recently.
I think I saw that earlier today.
So if someone were to monitor their college team flag-bearing neighbor they drive by, they would be limited to 4 time periods of 15 days?
Yes.
All right. Duly noted. And that hotline number is?
368-3728. Okay, so the next form of freestanding signs that we have recommended standards for are primarily banners. There might be other types of non-freestanding signs. And these photos are very deliberate. One is on a building and not exactly attached flat to the wall. It's kind of hanging from the, I think you would call that the soffit or the fascia. And the other one is attached to a fence. So what we're proposing is that they have the same length of time permitted as freestanding yard signs and freestanding banners. No restriction on the number. The area and size be restricted by the cumulative total, restricted to half of the maximum allowed for the wall signs in a zoning district. So that probably needs a little explanation. So if you have, let's say we're talking about a C2 zoning district, what we're recommending is a wall sign standard, the C2 district, for permanent signs that does not restrict the number, the quantity of signs, but limits the total of all wall signage to approximately what's equivalent to 20% of the wall area that is on that facade. We use a number, it's based on building frontage, but it's equivalent to about 20%. So if you can picture that, if someone came to us and said, hey, I want to put some banners on my wall, how much can I put on your wall? I would look at their building and say you can put 10%. But see, it changes by zoning district. So C4, I think you're allowed a little more than 20%. But that's how that's intended to work. And that it's placed flat on the exterior of the building wall only. So this is very significant. That's currently how it is. We don't allow banners to be attached to fences. The concern about them being attached to fences is because there are certain types of uses that like banners more than other uses, because a lot of times they get them for free. Like a liquor store gets all these beer distributors, they get the signs for free, and what happens when you get something for free is you probably overuse it. And it's a problem because in some of those areas, if they attached them to fences, they would really be cluttering up an area. Sometimes they're adjacent to residential uses and nice areas where that would be a problem for people. There are other types of structures I suppose you could attach them to, like light poles. But we're recommending that they only be allowed to be attached to the building, flat to the building.
I have a question. How often do you have people call and ask for permission?
For permission?
Yeah.
Not very often.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to be a city attorney. I can't recall anyone. Lots of
If we get
trying to police
a
it.
call, if we get a call about what kind of temporary signs can I install, a lot of times it's by a company that's providing the temporary signage for a business that's
opposed to the
opening.
business, right.
And sometimes they're from out of town and
Because usually what happens, the business goes ahead, orders the signage, they put them up. By the time you get there to police it, they're really ticked
Yes.
that you're gonna take it down, and it's a nightmare.
yes. Okay, so incidental signs. So incidental signs, these are some images of incidental signs. These are directional signs. This is something you see on like a campus, like a hospital campus or a college campus. But there are other kinds of directional signs that are lumped into the category of incidental signs. These are enter and exit signs for fast food restaurants. And these are menu boards, another form of incidental signs. Again, you cannot have a standard that for a menu board. A few things about menu boards, just to be clear, we do not currently have a problem with menu boards. That's not, the objective here is not to try to overly restrict menu boards. It's really to provide a fair system of signage that's content neutral. The challenge of that is menu boards are fairly large. So when you accommodate them, you're potentially accommodating other types of signs. But that's the challenge here. The other thing too with menu boards, a lot of times they are not visible from the street or from another property. They're on the back side of the building, but there are some cases where they are on the street side of the building. So our current code does not address specifically this type of sign. It's not really necessary because in most zoning districts currently, there's no limit on the number of signs. Most commercial districts, I should say. There's no limit on the number of signs. So you're allowed to have a lot of signs anyway. So that's where we are today. So this is an example of a site. This is a fast food restaurant, and the arrows point to directional signs that are out by the street. And
I got it.
And one of the arrows points to a menu board. So what we're proposing, this applies to the C districts anyway. What we're proposing is that at the property line, you're limited to 2 per 300 feet of frontage, 4-foot maximum height, 6-foot maximum area. We're not recommending that a setback be required. A lot of cities do require a setback. In fact, a lot of cities require a setback for permanent freestanding signs. We're not recommending that, but we do have what we call vision sight distance standards. So you're not allowed to put a sign in a vision triangle, what's called a vision triangle, which is just the area where a driveway and a street intersects. So you're limited in that way. Interior to the site, so as you step back, as you have a setback for the sign, you're allowed to increase the height in the area. So for every 10 feet, you're allowed to increase the sign. I didn't write specifically what it is, but it's in the table in your report. But suffice it to say that the maximum, what we're recommending is the maximum be 8 feet high and maximum 50 square feet per sign. No restriction on quantity when the setback is 30 feet or more. So, again, this is intended to accommodate signs in a way that's fair to most people or everybody to the extent that's possible. We don't foresee a problem with a lot of signs on the interior site. If someone's going to put the effort to put a sign on the interior of the site, first of all, it's not really going to create a negative impact for other people because it's on the interior of the site. And they're going to do that usually for wayfinding purposes, for directional purposes.
And so for incidental signs, again, we're not doing a permitting thing, right?
Incidental signs are a permanent type of sign, so I expect that we would require a permit for these types of signs, which is pretty typical.
All right.
So
you're relying on the site distance to act as your setback protection then?
Well, there are a couple things. So we don't require a setback for those small signs. As you go have a greater setback, you're allowed a higher sign and a larger sign. In addition to that, the thing that would control a setback would be that distance triangle.
Right, so because you say that you're not setting a setback at the property line, but so you're not requiring a setback from the property line other than whatever this distance triangle creates, so you're gonna rely on, so who's gonna evaluate that?
That's one reason we do require a permit, so we can review that. So the triangle is, I don't know if I can explain this very well without showing pictures, but if you measure 40, if you go to where there's an intersection of a driveway and a street, where those two lines intersect, like the edge of the roadway and the edge of the driveway, where those two lines intersect, there's a point. You measure along the street 40 feet, measure along the driveway 40 feet, you connect the ends of those two lines, and that forms a triangle, and that's the distance triangle. It sounds huge, but it's not that big because it's the edge of the street, it's not the edge of the right-of-way.
Right. And do we define what an incidental sign is?
In your packet, there is a list of draft definitions. So it's defined here, and this is a draft, I emphasize draft. A sign with copy located on a durable panel and mounted on a wall, pole, frame, or similar structure with or without a structural frame that is normally incidental to the allowed use of the property, but can contain any message or content. So it's very much a content-neutral definition. I think the word durable panel implies that it's not a flimsy type of, like a temporary type of sign.
I'm sorry, where was that in the packet?
That's, should be on page number 5. It's the last page in your packet.
Oh, okay.
And I'll give you a minute to find that. So all the signs we're talking about here, or the intention was that all the signs we're discussing here we have definitions for each one of those.
Thank you.
Michael, any sign that, for, say, a restaurant there, permanent sign, would that be an incidental sign?
Which sign?
The signs on the street, would those all be considered incidental?
Everything that's in a circle is a type of incidental sign under what we're recommending.
And then it says a max 4 foot, once you get further back, and it's 8 foot. Is that for any new signs then? So a new restaurant goes up, they've got to be lower, even if the ones around it?
Correct. So now I'd say some of them are 4 feet, some of them might be a little taller than that. But it's certainly, I think it's reasonable, doable.
What I'm thinking is the tall signs you see near the highway that are 100 feet up. Full sign.
So that's not an incidental sign. That's under our permanent sign standards. So,
Okay.
so and this, I can understand why this could be confusing. Someone is allowed a certain, what we're recommending is that there be a maximum quantity of permanent freestanding signs. That would not include these incidental signs necessarily. These incidental signs are in addition to that. And then, so if you can, I think it helps to understand that what our recommendation would be if something is zone C2, so this is a C2 land use, our recommendation at this point, what we've drafted is a maximum height of 25 feet, or 15 feet, excuse me, 15 feet. I can't remember what the maximum sign area is. I think it's 120 square feet. The incidental signs would be in addition to that they'd be allowed. So this is what we're proposing, this be a type of incidental sign. This is probably the only sign that cities do allow in right-of-way, which is what is often called a pedestrian portable sign. There are A-frame signs, sometimes they're in a T-frame style. They're usually on a durable, rigid background. I think I've dealt with this issue in another jurisdiction, and I think in downtown pedestrian environments, when they're successful, get a lot of restaurants, entertainment. They rely on these types of signs. It's kind of a sign of vitality, and a lot of them are kind of creative. So it's not something you want to prohibit necessarily. So our recommendation is to allow them and then limit the height and size and make sure that you accommodate pedestrians safely. So now we're to the portable message center signs, and at this time, staff's recommending that they be prohibited in all zoning districts. And I'll just read right out of the memo in the packet. So if you consider the visual appeal survey, and you consider the written comments we received and observations made by people, these are generally considered unattractive. Now, or generally is, I was very deliberate. It's somewhat subjective, obviously, but I think it's true that they're often poorly maintained and they're misused as permanent signs. So instead of getting a permanent sign, a business might get these, which are intended to be used temporarily or for special events, and they use them on an ongoing basis. Sometimes they have extension cords hooked up to them so they can light. They have the flashing lights on top. So we're recommending these be prohibited. We actually tried to draft some standards that accommodate them, but it's really difficult to do that. And enforcement, we anticipate would be an issue if you tried to make some accommodation for them. So just some factual information. Generally, these are 32 square feet per side. They're 5 feet high, and they're illuminated with flashing lights on top. Again, they're used as permanent signs in addition to other signs. Also included in your packet is an inventory of these. What we did is we did a survey where we drove along the major arterials in Topeka and drove along some of the more prominent collector streets. We didn't drive every street or every collector, but we did cover pretty much every arterial from border to border. And we've identified 90 of these in use in the city. Most of the signs are located in North Topeka and parts of East and Central Topeka. Most are located on property zone C4. In terms of use, if you look at those graphs in the packet, most are used by restaurants. So 23 of the 90 are used by restaurants, and a lot of them are used by auto-related uses such as auto repair, auto sales, and convenience stores. 21 of the 90 are used by those types of uses. So that is my presentation, and be happy to take questions and encourage discussion.
I guess I would like to start finishing up with my favorite topic here on this temporary signs. I do disagree with your survey for the portable signs. I remember that there were like 216 or 190 something that skipped that question. So I think all of those should be accounted as neutral. So that would bring down your percentage of people that don't like that sign. I also think, I know it may be difficult to regulate this, but I feel like if there was a regulation for like just keep it in good condition, and then good condition is whatever you guys determine it as. I don't know how that works lawfully, but I understand we do have some very poorly maintenance ones that are around town that don't look good. I completely agree with you. I just find it is so unique. You're not going to find any other town that has 90 of these just hanging out for everyone to like see. And I know they don't always look great, but it is such a cultural phenomenon that we have here. And I know so many of you don't like them, but I just feel like we shouldn't discredit them and try and get rid of them flat out. It's my 2 cents for it. I'm gonna fight this.
The other thing I'm seeing is you see these at schools, at churches, advertising their breakfast, their fundraiser. And there's a couple on this map here that are, looks like they're in front of schools.
I agree, and I
So-
think that they're better than like just a little tiny sign, you know, to stick there for how many ever days. I think it can be very graceful and used in the right way with like their messaging. And I like that it changes their messaging, because then you're always looking at what that business can provide. So I feel like they do benefit from it.
How would you differentiate a temporary sign from a portable message center? I mean, is it the fact that it has removable letters that make it not legal?
I think, to answer your question, I think you would define portable message center the way it is, you know, how you're defining it, and you're just not allowing it. I think one choice you have is to allow it as a temporary sign. That is an option. But you just define it by its construction.
So I'm kind of looking at like, more curiosity, looking at these signs here, the banners put up there. This one looks more permanent than the banner. But it doesn't have
Stuck in the ground,
Stuck in
yeah.
the ground, it looks like it's more,
So you're comparing the banner to the portable message center?
right.
So I don't think I answered your question very well. The way to define the portable message center is that you can change the copy on the sign.
Right.
And that's really, and then there's another
And it's
finer
the-
distinction, you can have an electronic message center.
Is the problem more that, more often than not, those get used permanently? I mean, that's probably the rub, isn't it? A lot of the signs are permanent. I can think of some in my head in North Topeka that have been for a
Been
long,
around
long
for
time.
years.
I
Yeah.
think they get used permanently, and also the size. They're like 32 square feet, right?
Yeah,
Or
so-
something like that on one side.
So what we're recommending for temporary signs, that they be limited to 16 square feet at the property line, and then you're allowed 32 square feet if you set it back. I think the other issue is that people do use them as permanent signs. Instead of getting, you can buy a permanent sign that's manual, has changeable copy, manually or electronically. At least that's what we're recommending, that's what we allow now. And so these tend to proliferate, they're hard to control. If you're trying to restrict the quantity of signs, this is an additional sign. And I think that's, other than that, I think it's just more general. I think it's ask 20 people and get 20 different responses.
If you took one of these signs, took the legs off, put it on a base, it became
Permanent sign.
a permanent sign.
You could convert this into a permanent sign. I think if that's a concern, and it's a concern that I have, is if you prohibit these, does someone just take one of these signs that's in poor condition
Right.
and put them on a pole? I think there's a way to do that. You could limit the percentage of the copy that is manually changeable copy. I think that would be legal. One thing I also did not mention, I actually had a table that didn't get into the slideshow. So I'd say, well, I don't want to say most, I haven't surveyed most cities in the country, but many cities do not permit these at all. They're just prohibited. So our primary comparison cities that we're using are KCK, KC-Mo, Olathe, and Lawrence. These are not permitted in any of those cities at all, under any circumstances. They are not permitted in Ottawa. They are permitted in Manhattan, but under very limited circumstances. They are permitted under certain zoning districts in Wichita. They're permitted as temporary signs in Hutchinson. So they're not permitted as permanent signs in Hutchinson. The other city, I think there was another city that we surveyed, but there's a reason that they're not permitted. I guess, I think that I want to recognize Commissioner Messina's comment that they're kind of a cultural phenomenon. They're kind of a signature feature of Topeka.
I wonder if that's why, because they're all banned everywhere else.
Yeah, right, they all come here.
And I think part of that is because a business owner owned all these signs, he rented them out. Now they're owned by another person who owns probably 50 of them. The other ones I think the other ones are owned by the users. And so it was a business idea that took off, and also I will say that we currently require an annual permit for them, but none of them are current on their permits.
Well, they should follow up. Like, that should be part of their expectations that they are putting in a permit for it.
If I may, a few things. One, I do refer to these now as Messina signs, just so you know.
Great.
Our choir practices at a church, and they had one of these permanently for the 2 years I was going to rehearsals, and then they replaced it with not just sticking it on a pedestal, but a real pedestal sign. But they can still change letters. It does look much better. Years ago, I had a client that had a whole bunch of these in 2 municipalities in another state, and spent a lot of time in municipal court because he didn't want to follow the regulations. It was actually not my client, my partner's client. So they get problematic, and that gets me to the point of, to really make these function, if we're going to do a regulation, I think we're going to have an inordinate amount of time being spent in enforcing it on these, if we want to have them regulated and look nice. And given what we've already heard of the ability for reasonable enforcement, I don't know how you can create a regulation that allows us to reasonably enforce it to the way where it would have the look that would be acceptable and to fit in with what we're doing with the rest of it. If we had 5 people on our sign code enforcement staff, I might be more open to doing that, but I just...
I have to agree with what he said. Like I said, I served as a city attorney. I also had a client who was a city and dealt with it, and you just can't manage it. I mean, people get heated, fights break out. You can't just go and remove the sign, and take it where we're going with it, So then you start assessing fines. They show up at the city council meeting. I mean, it just was a nightmare. They call up, they cuss out the city attorney, blah, blah, blah. They just were a nightmare. But the other thing is, you only have one person driving around enforcing it. You don't have to worry about that, because once the public finds out, they'll help you. They'll call you up and they'll insist you get somebody out there right now, get that sign down. And it's hard to manage.
Yeah, I'll, 2 things. One is, one of the options that we looked at was a setback, I believe, to try and at least get them further back from the corridor. Again, we landed on the fact that we had such heavy responses from the community that this is not a good thing, that, and it would be, on your point, it would make our enforcement of a sign that, do we really want it, take even more of our valuable enforcement time to deal with, which is probably why we landed on this, for starters. And the current code actually is mixed on, I know you mentioned about the permit, but we have one section that would allow a temporary sign, which you could consider this a temporary sign in our current code, 32 square feet. We have another section that specifically talks about portable signs in our sign code that says they're 8 square feet or so. So it's so there's conflicting regulations even in our current code. And I think the city's in its practice has been to just punt until we fix our sign code. So I have no doubt that if whatever regulation we choose to go forward with, like I said, I have a responsibility to make sure, at least telling you that this is something that is doable. I mean, if we're going to write a rule, we can go out and reasonably expect it to be enforced. temporary signs are probably the most difficult thing that we have to enforce from a zoning standpoint. And I compare it to in the heyday of Michael Jordan, where they would say, you know, you can't stop them, you can only hope to contain them. And that's kind of how we are approaching temporary signs, because without honestly, it's a lot of self-policing is what we found as well helps, is that if we get complaints and we go and enforce something, that will reinforce a behavior from somebody else. But if they see lots of signs that we're not enforcing, what's going to happen? They're just going to repeat that behavior. So I think we can get there enforcement-wise. I'll help to guide you, but I can tell you this would be, I definitely have some concerns if we were to try and parse this into something that we could hopefully allow. I'm not closing the door from a staff standpoint, but I totally respect the cultural phenomenon that has happened here. I do. So, and the valid uses that they are used for, which is why we want to open the door for other types of temporary signage that people can use in a temporary fashion. And so there's nothing more permanent than a temporary use. They just kind of
keep using it.
Always are there.
It's always temporary.
So that is, all valid stuff. But I thought you'd want to know from an enforcement standpoint. That and the survey were the two things that kind of why we landed on this for now. There's really temporary signs are just. I wish we could just not even have this discussion, but we have to. So here we are.
Is there any further discussion and questions? Any communications to the commission otherwise?
No, I think next step, and I just follow up, so next steps, our expectation is, just so you all know, we do want to contact folks and businesses that use these signs, use the horrible sign. We want to have that public meeting before it comes to you officially. We want to get, again, more feedback as we go through this. We probably will want to have we probably will have a public meeting for just the signs in general before it ever comes to you officially. So I just wanted you to know, we are planning to have some public outreach before it actually gets to you. So just when you're making your spring vacation plans, maybe in March and April might be our time we try to get this to you for work, probably a work session and then an official hearing. Is that?
Do we want to get any read on where the commission stands on this today, or is that appropriate?
That was part of the intent to bring you this. If there's any other remaining comments, we do want to hear. We've heard from some, so because that would influence what we bring back to you.
Anyone else feel strongly either way?
I do not see an aesthetic value nor community impact of keeping them.
Just keep laying it on.
Are you looking for feedback on everything or just?
Yes.
The temporary signs. Just did anything strike you, something good or bad that, a direction that you want to support or suggest another path?
I'm generally in agreement with it all. I'm a sight distance guy at the intersection, so the incidental signs without that, but your sight distance is different. Where I worked before, it was a 300-foot sight distance. When you got to the intersection, you're talking a 40-foot with a hypotenuse, so that's significantly smaller than what I'm used to, so.
And this probably doesn't come across enough because there's so many slices of this thing. We are allowing a new type of temporary sign, which is which is what you saw, one of the pictures with the posts and the banner, the freestanding banner. That actually is not allowed right now. Banners have to be put on a building. And so if you don't do that, the question inevitably comes back, well, what can I do at a reasonable, cost without doing a permanent sign? So that is one thing that we would allow. And then the other thing that, in terms of prohibition, we would maintain prohibition of signs on fences. There is some discussion, because there are some fences out there that, a construction site, a park, something that doesn't have a building maybe even on it right now. So we're going to look a little more into that. But that, I just want to throw that out there, because so you all know. That is another thing that we would prohibit and continue to prohibit. We get more calls about that. I'd say we get just about as many calls about signs on fences as we do portable signs. So, and we can do something about those.
Do you get any calls about these?
We don't anymore, because once we tell people that we're not, they're allowed, then, but we do, when people don't know what the rules are. Yeah. Other communications, you've addressed the one issue that came back to you from council tonight. Thank you. That should go on as early here in January or mid-January. I think that is that the only other? Yeah, we didn't have anything in November, so there was nothing at council this month. So that's all I have.
Motion to adjourn.
Second. Adjourned.